and growing over the years. I still talk about making a book of them, but that's so boring to do books that I've never quite gotten around to that.
Real programmers write programs, not documentation.
Well, it'd be a teaching, it'd be a teaching material. This is my website. I don't know that you need this spot anymore. That was the name of a specific server, but you could see the website. Sorry, it's also in the footnote to any emails I've sent, giving that my homepage address. This is the front page of this, and if you look under teaching on the left-hand side, if you click that, the right-hand side gives a lot of the materials that I've done for a course that I'm retired now. So I think I last taught it in 2017. Unfortunately, some of the programs are out of date, but these gives a lot of materials. There is GAMS files are there, and these things that say chapters are notes, but they keep getting revised. I need to update that. But if you want to see a lot of my materials, you can find them there. Now, the kind of more updated thing I haven't posted yet, but so now I have to go to a different file, or is this going to show? Oh, this is better. I can do different things.
Can you click on the right-hand side top, so it fits the whole screen?
Yeah.
Yes. Great.
So I could also send this around. This is my more complete course that I'm working on, though I don't have notes for everything. That goes starting from very basic principles, which this first group is, for example, what I did this morning. And then I did some of the second group, although they had somewhat different names. And then it goes into a lot of other things. There's a section on industrial organization, games, information, operation, research. A whole bunch of things you can see here. There's a section on problems in statistics and finance, formulated as nonlinear programming problems, which most econometricians would absolutely hate if they saw some of this, but heck with them. Section on public finance, which is general equilibrium. Things like introducing endogenous labor supplies, multiple households. There's public goods, how to model a public good, which is non-excludable and non-rivaled, which is sort of a tough problem. Pollution externalities, how to solve using MPEC for an optimal tax in that environment. How impose a social welfare function and solve for optimal redistribution policies. Optimal meaning hitting some target or maximizing a social welfare function over different households with respect to certain tax instruments. That's a nice application of MPEC. Scale economies and imperfect competition, adding those to general equilibrium. Large group monopolistic competition, small group. Some stuff on heterogeneous firms that's not great, but illustrates some things. There are notes that go with that. Open economy models in competitive economies. I'll show you some of that today. And then open economy models for imperfect competition and scale economies. And this has to be redone towards CGE modeling. I really need to work on that and get that up to snuff, and you want to use Tom's MPSG higher level language for that. And it's kind of cool. my dynamic modeling is terrible, and I should do something with that. It does want to show some cool things, how you can treat an infinite horizon problem as a finite dimensional MCP. I learned that from Tom. That part I all got from Tom. I could send this around, and also all those M files of M for model could be put in a zip file, because none of them are very big. A lot of these are like 5 kilobytes or 3 kilobytes. So they're little models.
Hotel location.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure that out. Hub and spoke model. That's kind of neat. Yeah, some of these were, I did this. There's consumption value in this. That's why I make it free, I guess. I don't know. I get health insurance with moral hazard and adverse selection, and you can actually see the effects when you run the model of if you price health insurance at an actuarially fair value, the firm loses money because the risky types buy the insurance and the safe types don't. It's classic Stiglitz. I think he was the guy that came up with that. Moral hazard: if you buy the insurance, you behave less safely. You can model all these things. It's really fun to do over the years. So maybe GAMS would like to finance doing a book, because I think this would be really attract a lot of users. Okay. So I'll minimize that. I thought, so we're going to do a couple other extensions, and
No worries. Sorry, you missed. Yeah, it's just difficult these days.
I thought I'd do an extension of the basic model we were doing to open economy, and just show you kind of the basics of how that works. And then again, in my model library, you can go to more and more complicated, building up from simple things. Again, I really encourage people to, make themselves toy models. It's incredibly educational to do that, to make simple models capturing very basic things. If you start way too complicated, you'll never get there. I mean, most of you are too young to know, but Tom and I would remember when they came out with a 16K memory chip. My first personal computer was 2 megabytes.
And that was a huge one.
That was a big one. The hard drive was extra. It was like $1,000 extra. But the stories out of Intel is, you had to do these things incrementally. 16K, and then we made a 64K chip, and then we made a 1 megabyte chip. And that's sort of my view of doing these things. You start really simple, get it to work, and then work incrementally toward more complicated things is where you want to end up.
And separate the data work from the theory. Get the theory straight first.
Yes.
Before you put data.
Yeah.
Don't try to do data theory at the same time.
Yes. That's a good footnote to that. Yeah, for sure. So one of the simplest ways to make an economy into an open economy model, and I'm going to use the same two good two-factor model that we had before, is the small country assumption is that countries face fixed world prices. It's way overused in trade theory, and international macro way overused as well. And it's very simple, because these world prices become parameters and they're just exogenous. But it's a good place to start about thinking about the world. And the key thing to doing this in GAMS is just to think of trade links as added activities, where the input is one country's X and the output is the other country's X going into the demand side for them. So you can model trade opportunities by simple functions which allow economy to transform one good into another. And the technology of these functions represents the world prices. How much X do I have to export for the other country's Y good or something like that. And so the way you model changing world prices is as if it was a technical change in that activity. Oh, a deterioration in your terms of trade means you need to have a larger quantity of exports of your good for 1 unit of the other good that you're importing. So in this model, we're going to have 2 goods, X1 and X2, and the country exports X1 in exchange for X2. And these are going to be called activities E1 and E2. But we could allow for the fact that some policy change or endowment change or technical change could actually reverse the direction of trade. So I'm going to put in the opposite direction trade activities, which are initially slack. So this is a case where the benchmark has slack activities in it, but nonetheless, they're in the model and they could become active if there was a big enough parameter change in some other variable, subsidizing the production of something that had been an import good. If you subsidize it enough, you can actually export it. And the welfare results would show the folly of equating exports with welfare. And how many countries have done that over the decade? You can't count them. So in the initial data, 50 units of good X1 are exported in exchange for 50 units of good 2. So the implicit world price ratio is 1-to-1. So here's my little matrix. So this is also a good practice. You don't have to do this. You can make a model, just set some parameter values and let the model rip and find a solution. But it's a little hard to make sure you've done it right. And I think in starting out making simple models to try out ideas, it's a good idea to start with a calibrated set of numbers. These are completely made up numbers. They're not real numbers, but still you're going to calibrate the model and run the model to make sure that it reproduces this numbers as a solution. Okay, so we have 2 initial activities that are active in the model. 150 units of X1 are produced, but 50 units are exported, and they're exchanged. So that's a cost to the economy, and they're exchanged for 50 units of sort of an artificial good, which is like an accounting convention, I guess, not like a virtual currency, just an accounting convention, because when you have lots of goods importing and exporting, it's just convenient rather than have all these bilateral things going on. Every export is exchanged for something called foreign exchange, which may not be a good term because it doesn't actually exist in any real form. It's just a scorecard in the sky, right? You export and you get a credit for export. So your exports of 50 units give you a credit of 50 units of foreign exchange, and then you spend that foreign exchange over here. You spend your credit in the accounting book in the sky for 50 units of imports of the good. It is really dark. It looks like it's nighttime out there. For those of you zooming in from different parts of the world, we're having a thunderstorm. It's almost nighttime at 3 in the afternoon. So these E1 and M2 things are just added activities. They have inputs and they have outputs. And so the extension of the basic model I talked about earlier to an open economy, especially a small economy, is really quite simple. These are just added activities that transform things from one to the other. So this economy exports X1. Why? It's a good that's intensive in labor and the country is well endowed with labor, has 140 units labor versus only 60 of X2. Again, these are totally made up numbers, but they are micro. We may lose, if we lose power, we'll see you tomorrow, all of you out there. And essentially, as I said earlier, the ratio of imports to exports is implicitly a world price ratio. I'm saying in this basic case that the world price ratio is one that is given to these economies, and that's fixed. That's the technology is the price ratio. Wow. So we have parameters when you want to, we can vary those world prices and see how that affects welfare by sticking in a bunch of parameters. And so I have P here stands for parameter. I guess probably not the best choice of notation. So the export price of good one, good two, and so forth for both exports and imports. So there's going to be two slack activities initially, which represent a possible reversal in the direction of trade. And that's allowed then in the model. So I set the active prices equal to 1 and 2. And then, as many things in modeling over my lifetime, you learn things the hard way. And one thing I didn't realize, the model was blowing up when I raised the price of the export good. The slack activities, I had the same price, but didn't change that price. And sometimes the computer is smarter than the modeler. So what happens if the export price of a good goes up, but the import price of the same good doesn't go up?
Import that good and export it. You got a money machine.
You got a money pump, okay? You export it for 1.5 and re-import it for 1. And GAMS tries to find the solution and it goes off to infinity, which is the correct solution, actually. And you get an error message. So there needs to be a little bit of gap. Also, if the prices are exactly the same for importing and exporting the good, there's infinitely many possible solutions, all of which are equivalent, but it's sort of like that price level property, that if you double all prices, it's still the same. So if the price for exporting a good and importing good are exactly the same, you can get a solution where you export 1 unit and import 0, but you could also get a solution in which you export 2 units and import 1. Now, really, that's the same in net trade. I mean, you're importing 1 unit, but there's a slipperiness. What's a good term for that? This is degenerate. It's a degeneracy in the model. In a welfare sense, all the solutions are the same, but we just got the light back. Okay.
Jim, one comment that's probably useful to make here is that we're using the standard trade theoretic assumption, which is that the current account is balanced.
Yes.
We have none of this. There's no macro phenomena going on. There's no capital flows. There's not all these transitional things. We ignore those or assume that in the long run, you have to pay for whatever you import, you have to pay for with exports. So it's going to lock the economy down.
Yeah. And I think I have one of those in model library where you have maybe an initial deficit, but it's held constant. You start with a negative endowment. No, that's, you have to run it. You start with a positive or negative endowment of this foreign exchange good. But that's kind of a kludge to calibrate it to real data. I mean, it's just holding the trade deficit constant. And there's some interesting papers, actually. We just heard one by this guy, Raphael Dix Cordiero, or whatever his name is, where he has a GE model where they endogenize the trade balance. And so if you have a shock, part of the shock can be absorbed by a deficit over some period of time. Yeah, round tripping is the word. Degeneracy. You just there's some examples of this. I actually participated in one. Should I tell a very short anecdote? My wife's from Ireland, so we once before Good Friday Agreement in 1998, participated with some of my rural in-laws in smuggling stuff from Ireland to Northern Ireland and vice versa to arbitrage price differences. It could sometimes be the same good. So you could, Britain was subsidizing dairy products. Ireland wasn't because they were exporter of that. So you could export, you take a case of butter over to your favorite friend in Northern Ireland and go to the store and re-import your own butter at a lower price. You can arbitrage on the same good, which is doesn't work in the computer. Well, it does work in a computer model. It blows up to infinity. You can make more and more profits the more that you do that. So I've already said this, I guess. So yes, so this foreign exchange good is not a consumption good in any sense. It's just kind of an accounting convention that allows, you don't have to specify every single bilateral link, exporting good one for good two, exporting good one for good, three. You can export and earn foreign exchange, which is this common good. Okay, so to the model we had this morning, this adds 4 equations, 2 of which are active in the benchmark and 2 of which are slack. So the ones that are active are E1, exporting good one. There's a typo there. That should not say 0, that should say 50. So you're exporting 50 at the price of 1. That earns foreign exchange. That's the world price there. And then the other activity that's active initially in the benchmark is this one, where you take that foreign exchange that you've earned and you buy the import good from it. So you have an extra good here, this good called foreign exchange. So if you have an extra variable, you need an extra equation. So the extra equation is actually the trade balance condition, which is supply and demand of foreign exchange. So the left-hand side of the added equation, market for foreign exchange, the left-hand side is the supply. That's what you earn by exporting. And the right-hand side is your expenditure on the imports from that foreign exchange. So that's the trade balance condition. And people have calibrated to data sets that don't have a current account balance, as Tom was mentioning, by simply having a plus or minus added, which is the initial imbalance. And so then when you do experiments, you're just holding that imbalance constant, which that's not great, but allows you to do a static formulation of what is really a dynamic problem. Okay, so now I need to, so now the way Tom did it, I can just go directly to that file. So this is the GAMS file. In a minute, we're going to do some of this in set notation. That's going to be the last thing I guess I do today. So as these models get bigger, it's really tedious to write out every equation when they in fact have common things. So there's sets of goods, sets of factors, sets of countries, and things like that. And I'll show you that in a minute. But this is the model written out, calibrated to that initial set of data. So when you run the model, it should reproduce that if it's done correctly. And model, I also put in a tariff, which is 0 initially. So where does a tariff go? Well, it's just a tax on one of those activities. And specifically, you're importing good 2. So where the tax goes is on the left-hand side. It marks up the cost of the import good by the amount of the tariff. But then for the model to be consistent and balanced, that tax revenue then has to also appear in the budget constraint. Or you can do a transport cost as we did earlier in the day. We did that in the morning. So I'm talking about one model and showing you a different one. That was the one for a large open economy. That's all right. Whoops, no one knows. Yeah.
It's not the
Oh.
yellow.
Oh, but that one didn't have it. Oh, no. Okay, I was talking to one model and showing you a different one. It probably says I did them. So this first one, I will show you then that one, but this one, the first experiment, after reproducing the benchmark is to say, okay, what if we make the endowment of labor bigger, make it 2 instead of 1, and this allows us to verify 2 things from undergraduate trade, the Rybczynski theorem and factor price equalization theorem. The Rybczynski theorem says that this should increase the production, should more than double production of the labor-intensive good and shrink production of the capital-intensive good. The factor price equalization theorem says this shouldn't change factor prices at all as long as you remain non-specialized, until you go to a corner solution. The second experiment, these are kind of the ones I did in the simple fudge way this morning, and now we're doing them with the open economy. Second experiment, set the endowment of labor back to the benchmark value of 1 and increase the price of the export good by 50% and increase the price of re-importing that good by the same amount or a little bit more, or you're going to get this, the model will explode. We can actually do that, see what happens if you don't do that. And then the third experiment is to show a corner solution. Again, if you push the price of PX high enough, the economy goes to a corner solution. The production possibility frontier only meets the price line at the X1 axis, and you completely specialize in that good. So let's just run that model very quick. So this was benchmark replication. And here's where we can see the role of the marginal. So we've replicated the benchmark, country exports good 1 and imports good 2. There's 2 slack activities, which are the opposite direction of trade. They're 0 and they have a positive marginal, which means that you don't want to export good 2 because you'd lose money. All right. So the difference between the marginal cost to the economy of exporting and importing that good is marginal cost of exporting that good is 0.05, which was that extra little bit I put on to prevent this round tripping and indeterminacy. So there you have a case. I suppose you could call that a corner solution. There's going to be these slack activities that are inactive in the benchmark. So then the next solve statement is in doubling the endowment of labor in the economy, and that more than doubles the output of the labor-intensive good and shrinks the output of the capital-intensive good, which is the Rybczynski theorem. All prices remain unchanged. So this also kind of validates the factor price equalization theorem, which says if you can change factor endowments and not change factor prices because they're absorbed in changing the composition of output. You just take all that extra labor and put it into the labor intensive good. And in fact, you bring over some capital from the other sector as well, which is why it shrinks. So that's sort of two of the main results you get in an undergraduate textbook on international trade. And sort of here's the third one. So this has increased the price of the export good by 50%. So export production, X1 production goes up. Not that much. It's kind of surprising. The other sector shrinks. You export more and you import more because you have better terms of trade now. Welfare goes up. This is a validation of the Stoper-Samuelson theorem right here. We're using the price of utility as numeraire. The consumer price index is constant. So PL going to 1.28 is a real increase. So that's relative to what you have to pay for commodities with PW chosen as numeraire. And PK goes down. So there's a welfare gain, obviously, from this, but in this kind of hexaroline model, you get a very strong redistribution effect as a consequence of that. And then the last example was increase the price of export good from 1 to 3, and that computes as a corner solution. Okay, so X2 is no longer produced. The economy is fully specialized in good 1. X2 is slack, and the marginal says how unprofitable it is. Would it be to produce that good? So that 0.5440, this number right here, is marginal cost minus price. It's the imbalance in the equation associated with the variable. So that's the unprofitability of producing that good in the equilibrium. Okay. If you keep increasing the price of the good, the Stoper-Samuelson theorem is no longer valid because all of your factor supplies go into one sector and there's no further change in relative factor prices. Okay. So a lot of, the framework I talked about this morning, which is really due to Tom and I guess Lars Mathieson, where you kind of have these blocks of equations of pricing, market clearing, and income balance. And then any auxiliary equations, like we had the endogenous tariff equivalent of the quota, is a remarkably robust framework for extending these things to more and more complicated models, more and more complicated cases that include more and more other features. And lots of the stuff like endogenous markup equations and imperfect competition models can be, are just some added equations in the model. We call them auxiliary equations. And the basic underlying framework is robust. In my field of international trade, I see more and more people using simulations. And I just get the feeling by talking to them and answering the questions often that just every problem is ad hoc. Everything is made in the craftsman's workshop. No interchangeable parts. When rifles used to be made, one-on-one, and no part from any rifle would fit in the other rifle, even though it was supposedly the same. And this framework that I got from Tom and showed this morning is, as I said, I'm repeating myself, but remarkably robust for adding lots and lots of other complications to the model. I should stop there and ask if there's any questions at the moment for this this open economy firm.
Generally theory of numbers.
You don't have any questions so far?
I
Okay,
mean, the thing is that the challenge, if you made this, it's this problem of being a jack of all trades. The challenge in equilibrium modeling generally is that you need to have your finger on the pulse of what's being said in the theory journals to kind of know what people are sort of clued into. But you also have to have an awareness of where to get data and how to work with data and how to reconcile things. This was done relatively kind of in short order today. This process, we have Jim holds up a matrix and says, there's the benchmark, and boom, we're off and running. But in many times, you spend a lot of time just finding the numbers for where the numbers come from, how to calibrate this thing. And then there's also at the other end is when you have larger models, then the problem is that you get a solution and then you want to make sense of what the solution is. So you have to design scenarios and be able to control the model and manipulate it. And so there's a number of sort of, well, there are different skill sets that are involved here. And I think that in terms of going to pick one thing to be good at, I'd say being conversant with the theory and the policy is the first. If you don't have that stuff at your fingertips, then you really won't make progress. That's more important than just about anything. And then the next thing would be the programming thing of how do I translate ideas into models. And you can always work with someone else's model, but I think once you get this ability to build little models, even to get your ideas straight, this helps enormously for your thinking. Even if the model you generate is not the one you use, just for the process, thinking through the process is helpful. And then there's all these more computer data science type things. How do I work with data sets? How do I move this CSV file? Okay, this is 1.8 terabytes. How do I handle this, right? There's all these sorts of things that are sort of nuisance things that the profession sort of undervalues. I mean, when I was a graduate student, I remember, and it's not, I thought John Sheldon was just great. He was like, God, he could do all sorts of stuff. But I asked him for a copy of the GemTap. This was before GemPack. This was GemTap was the first, it was the Chauvin-Wally general equilibrium public finance model that was the first. They produced a series of papers, one of which was in the AER, and they had a number of, and so I asked John to get a copy of his model, and they were all, of course, in those days, they're all in Fortran, and Fortran code comes in, and the names of the Fortran programs for running this model were wash, fold, spin, dry, right? It's sort of simple, it's sort of kind of encapsulated the economist's attitude toward the actual modeling was. It's like doing the laundry. You don't talk about it, you just do it, right? And hope to do a good job, but you don't really care because no one's going to ask you about it. So there's, over the years, this was always something you had to be sort of a little bit, I think I'm just a little bit crazy to sort of enjoy it. But the thing funny is like it's the victory of the nerds over the world, because these sorts of these skills that involve moving data around, that's the stuff that's paying the bills now for all these data intensive activities, right? Data science is all about knowing how to deal with this big data file. If you don't know how to use, data frames inside of pandas, inside of this or that, and you're really not able to do anything. So the thing is, this has evolved into now that's a field where we have, and it's a matter of combining your knowledge of theory and policy and issues and data sources together with these data science skills are the main challenge. So tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll go through the basic theory of the WiNDC GTAP model, and we'll go through some simulations with that model, sort of illustrate how to take the model off the shelf and do simulations. And we'll also then go through the process of the data science things about how do we control the output to look at results, and how do we, these sorts of mundane things. We'll go back to this sort of oil sanctions exercise at lunchtime to sort of look through that a little bit. And that's mainly about working with the WiNDC framework. I'll go through a few, will be a bit of a review for people who have been following along the WiNDC lectures, but it's an opportunity for you to sort of know what we have, and you can see what the latest release of that is. And then also I've been working, this is sort of not really ready for prime time, but I've been working on, I knew that folks were here from Commerce, and the Commerce folks are always really under the gun to produce numbers immediately on all sorts of issues. And the main challenge they have is that they can't really, the GTAP sectors are really not sufficiently detailed. So I've been working on a version of be able to move the region of the sectors that we have that are available through the XEO-based multi sort of input-output framework into a GTAP-based model. So I'll talk a little bit about that in the model. That's sort of stuff that's that's sort of work in progress, but that'll be sort of more in this data science sort of thing. And then the final day on Wednesday, we talk about dynamic models and then overlapping generations models and how do you do that in GAMS. So we have a pretty good algorithm. This is a set of tools I developed over years ago. It's for learning how to do. So Wednesday will be more about dynamic modeling and OLG. So that's what we have on the program. But I didn't mean to sort of wrap up right off the bat.
No, I was going to do sort of a quick introduction to sets because you're going to rely on that. So we'll take a little bit more. I'm just going to show an example in the scalar form and then the set form.
Yeah.
But yeah, the numbers. Let me tell an anecdote. We'll break it up a little. I have to tell about coffee table elasticities.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a good. People like this little story, and it kind of partly shows how far we've come. So John Chauvin and John Wally were two of the originators. They were students of Herb Scarf, I guess, at Yale, and really started implementing his theory and his algorithms for solving models. But very slow, very complicated, and lack of data. There were no electronic data sets. I guess somebody went to the books in the library and copied down the data or something.
We should mention about Scarf that most of this framework is actually due to Chapter 5 in Scarf's book, Computation of Equilibrium Crises. And it's his co-author, it's actually his graduate student, because he did give Terry Hansen, he cited it as it's Herb Scarf with Terry Hansen. So Terry Hansen was his graduate student at that time, who was familiar with this, and really this bringing complementarity into general equilibrium and coping with point to set mappings and how to handle inequality. That was the main focus of Herb's work. And Terry Hansen was one of the real pioneers. Hansen was the one who implemented the original Miller-Spencer model for modeling the economic effects of the UK joining the European Union. That was Terry Hansen's computational work.
Okay. A lot of history of thought there.
Yeah.
So this is a little piece. I mean, especially, I never really knew John Chauvin, but John Wally was our colleague at Western Ontario. And he, he would poke fun at himself sometimes. So one of the phrases that he invented was coffee table elasticity. And the problem in those is you could get the numbers, you could get quantities and prices and trade flows and everything, but you had no idea what the elasticities were, especially from one observation data set. You can't say anything about it. So he invented the term coffee table elasticity. And what does that mean? It means you get your friends around the coffee table and you're looking for some elasticity of substitution or something. Tom, what do you think this elasticity is? 2. No, I think it's 3.5. And somebody else says, oh no, it's much lower. It's 0.5. And so partly poking fun at himself, he talked about coffee table elasticities as, those are the numbers that go into the model that you can't observe, especially in just one calibrated observation, which is frequently pointed out by econometricians. Now, the footnote to this story, and he was talking about a 1976 paper. I think that's the J. Pubby paper that was, been cited so many times and so many things. So 20 years after that, I think it was late 80s, I'm reading a journal article and it, that had a CG model in it, and it said, we take our estimates of elasticities from Chauvin and Wally, 1976, as if, this legitimized it, right? And all they were coffee table elasticities. We all gave our opinion on. Anyway, it's kind of a fun little story. So I'm just gonna, and I could send these files around. This is what a two-country hexaline model does. So prices are endogenous. There's two countries. I made up a very symmetric example of two countries. And the notation like X, H to F. H and F are home and foreign countries. X and Y are the goods. So you have these bilateral trade activities where the home firm exports X. X going from H to F is an activity. Y going from H to F is an activity, but it's slack in the benchmark, just like the example we showed. These are the same number basically as what I just showed you, but there's two countries now. And I made up a very symmetric example because it was easy to sort of fill in the numbers. So the countries have opposite endowments. This is a perfect example of a hexaline model. The home country is heavily endowed with labor and scarce in capital, and it's just the mirror image for the other model. So this can be calibrated, but it shows how things quickly get complicated, not mathematically complicated. You just get lots and lots more dimensions to the problem. So each of these activities is coded. Tom likes to call this the scalar version. Activities and equations and variables are not defined over sets. Each of them is an individually defined activity. And it follows the same idea that we had before of there's a set of quantity variables, there's a set of prices, set of income, and the equations are pricing equations, market clearing equations, and income balance equations. I've added a couple extra equations and variables for doing an impact. You can actually do optimal tariffs in this version of the model. That's not the main thing I want to focus on right now. So you can solve this model. Just the constraint set is its own general equilibrium model. Never mind the things. Then you can do various things with this model, including maximizing joint welfare. You can have unilateral, one country imposing an optimal tariff that's not retaliated with. And you can actually solve in this framework for a Nash equilibrium where by iterating, each country imposes its optimal tariff against the other. And you can look at things like differences in country size. And you'll find intuition from theory says that the larger country should have a larger tariff at the Nash equilibrium, and the smaller country should suffer worse from that. And all of these things are verified. We can come back to this in a minute, but what I wanted to do for the moment is say, as we start getting to higher dimension cases, it just becomes more and more valuable to use sets where the underlying elements of the sets are common across the country. So we can think of here as a set of goods, a set of factors, and a set of countries. So again, I could circulate these two models, but this is a set version. What do you call a set version? An indexed model of exactly the same problem done in a more compact way. I also illustrated how you can directly take a set of numbers and call them in from an Excel file. In this case, just for teaching purposes, I actually put the numbers in at the top of the file, but in this case, it's not a comment, you're actually going to read those numbers. So this is a GAMS keyword table, and I'm going to call that bench for benchmark. And the stars just means, what are they called? Wildcard? Wildcard, and it'll take the names of those things from the actual model. So then the labels for the first star is columns and the second one is the rows. And those are the names of variables in the model. But we're not going to use the H and F notation. We're going to index this model. So there's three sets in the model, still pretty simple. There are two goods, that's set I. There are two factors of production, and there are two countries, H and F. Parameters are going to be endowment of factors in factor J and country C, trade cost of importing a good into a country, factor share, beta is the share of factor J in the production of good I. That's going to be common across countries. That doesn't have, so they have identical technology. This is a Hectorian model. Gamma is the share of good I in the utility function. Well of W is the welfare weight of country C in world welfare in case we want to optimize world welfare. And results is allows to assemble the results into a nice table. So this is probably a little more complicated than it needs to be, but what this next set of equations are doing is extracting data from that table in a form that will go into the functions. This is a model in which the functions, as you'll see in a minute, have no numbers in them. Okay, they're all taken directly from a table of numbers, and these shared parameters. Tom is going to be mad. I'm still sticking with Cobb Douglas here. So the observed share is the share parameter in the utility function. Not hard to generalize into CES. Trade cost for good I is initially set to a tiny amount to prevent round tripping, but doesn't, it could be varied by sector. Then there's these, again, for doing experiments about optimal tariffs, there's a variable for joint welfare maximization, unilateral welfare maximization by country H, unilateral welfare maximization by F, and the tariff of good I, of country I on good I is TCI of C. And that is a variable in the Somebody walked into somebody's room. Okay. So positive variables, I really should call them non-negative variables, but GAMS just treats it as a non-negative variable. You can't. Positive variable could, not go to zero or something. That word shouldn't be there.
It used to be, they would have used non-negative, but non-negative has more than 8 characters. When we first developed them, I think they were limited to 8 characters.
Okay, so positive variable means non-negative.
It means non-negative. They could
So,
use non-negative.
This may go back to where it was. So then these things like production, imports, exports are indexed over sector and country. Utility is indexed over country. Prices are indexed over sector and country and so forth. Factor prices are indexed over factors and countries. So you see this is a much, much more compact list of variables than we had in the scalar version. And as the dimensionality rises for like goods and factors and countries, it goes up by the cube of how those dimensions are rising. So the set version becomes so much more valuable as the dimensions of the model rise. Equations are similarly indexed. I put them in the same order, which is not necessary at all in GAMS, but it makes sure I can look at them and say, yes, I have them in the same order. So for the production of X, I have the zero profit condition for X and so forth. So they're done in the same thing. There are different objective functions we can use in MPEG. Joint welfare maximization is the product over countries So this is another Cobb-Douglas function. Just a Cobb-Douglas function of the two countries' individual welfares. It could be just additive. It could be the minimum of the two countries' welfare. That's what we call a Rawlsian welfare function. And the sum of them is typically called a Benthamite, where you're just maximizing the sum of everyone's utility. Somebody could be starving to death, but that's okay in that formulation. So this is Cobb-Douglas in between those two extremes. Or the welfare of an individual country. Again, if you're going to use something as an optimization variable, it has to be declared as a free variable, not as a positive or non-negative variable. So then these are, what was the big list of equations now is much more compact. So this is the general equilibrium model. And that can be just run as an MCP without the optimization on top of it. So that's the first MCP model, gives the two-country, two-factor, two-good general equilibrium model in a much more compact form than writing it out, which also helps prevent a lot of errors, frankly, where you just type one wrong thing and the whole thing doesn't work.
The trade-off is you have to be comfortable with the set-oriented functions in games. You have to know what prod and sum. You get a couple. It does take time. At the beginning, people, particularly those who come into games from a more conventional programming language, are not so often accustomed to these tools, right? So learning how to deal with sets is really another way to be comfortable with the set-oriented notation. One, for example, there you have a definition of MKV is defined, that set is defined over J and C. So it says VS of JC is equal to sum over I. And then here we have the prod over JJ. So JJ is the same set as J, but we need to be able to pull out, we need to be able to do an operation over a set which is already active in the definition of the equation. So that's the thing. Those sorts of things of when do you have to have a second reference to the same set? This is what takes time for people to get used to dealing with. Right now, it's not easy to describe how this works, but it takes time. We've all made the transition. Jim was a Fortran programmer, I was too, so we've made the transition. But these days, it's more about if you're a Python programmer, learning to be comfortable with set-oriented references takes a little bit of work. Right?
Yeah. So giving two different names for the same set is this command up here, alias. So the set JJ is the same elements as set J. And it's just the way the underlying code is. It would be illegal to say y of I equals the sum over I of x of I. That's an illegal command. You get an error message that says set is under control already. But it's easily got around in GAMS. You just give a different name for the same set.
Now, if you're writing equations in mathematics using mathematical notation, you normally use J prime. So it's sum over J prime to indicate it's J, but it's a different version of J. And that's why you normally write it out. And so this is JJ, as a GAMS programmer, you read JJ as J prime. Right?
Yeah.
Reference,
okay. Yeah. So starting values are important. Again, as I emphasized this morning, why that is, if they're all 0, which are the default values, the solver just can't get started. It can't do a function evaluation. It can't calculate the gradient at a point it doesn't know exists. Doesn't exist. First, do I ever? Yeah, we solved that model. There's two different models declared here. In MCP, just forget about optimizing, picking optimal tariffs. Let those be just a fixed parameter and solve the general equilibrium model. The second version, you can choose one of the objective functions, and the constraint set on the optimization problem is that same general equilibrium model. That's under MCP there. And so that sort of shows the relationship between the two.
And you have to use impact rather than NLP because these are inequalities. but we don't know
Yeah,
the boundaries.
yeah. So the objective function equations don't get a dot. They're they're just written there, and then, but then the constraint set, which is the MCP model, has the dot notation because they're inequalities. Okay. So then the first counterfactual is to maximize joint welfare. And these countries are pretty symmetric, so that should be free trade. There's no other distortions in the model. If this was a monopolistic competition model, the joint welfare maximum is not free trade. It's to subsidize these goods in both countries. Trade fix. So then you know, there's a couple other solve statements here, fixing a tariff at 1.2. Solve. So this equation is a unilateral imposition of an optimal tariff by country H only. So solve MPEC using MPEC maximizing welfare of country H. And then you collect the results and see what the optimal tariff does for that country and for the other country, which is of course going to be made worse off because, as it said, there's no other distortions in the model. And this is a kind of little bit of code. I'm sure it's very hard to follow this right off the bat, but this is code for a Nash equilibrium. That's an iterative procedure. So you fix the tariff of one country and solve for the other country's optimal tariff. Then you unfix the other country and fix the first country's tariff at that solution value and run it again. And you loop over that. And it's amazing how fast it converges. It converges like 10 iterations easily. Yeah, that's a term for that, is diagonalization. And then show what the results are. That's an old, very simple command for dumping to shelf. So let's run that model. And this very fast. So this is the benchmark replication. When you have a model in sets, that's what it looks like. The tariff is fixed at 0, essentially. It really drops that from the model, or it's treated as a parameter. Then you have the activities. It shows the way GAMS displays it is it's the first set index and then the values for the second index and then the second value of the first index and so forth. And you can do 3-dimensional sets. I have one model where there's a 4-dimensional set and the display gets a little complicated, but it's really done in a fairly sensible way, I think. So those are all the solution values. Each country exports its why are these not exactly 50? I guess because I put that little bit of trade costs in there to prevent any kind of round tripping, but effectively those 49.98 are 50. And so forth. The prices there again, these, setting the prices to prevent this round tripping thing kind of does the job. The second solution was did I do an interlim equals 0, 1? I'm not sure. Right. So these are fixing them though. They're not endogenous. So their .fx number, a 20% tariff reduces, where's the welfare level is called U here. Yeah, so the country imposing the tariff gets a welfare gain in terms of trade effect. but it's small, 2.85 or 1 point or what, half of that because in percentage terms. Yeah. And the other country gets a welfare loss because it has a deteriorating terms of trade. So as always, this is sort of a bigger than neighbor policy to impose a tariff like that. So then is this when we go into the iterative procedure? See this is why you collect things at the end, because looking through these darn things is, yeah, it's really,
I jumped to the bottom. Too.
yeah. So the iterative procedure, yeah, the last thing is this iterative procedure and gives you the results. So let's,
At the very bottom of it. If you're
Yeah.
left-hand panel, you just slide that down.
oops.
So bottom.
Yeah. So this collects results. Then you don't want to, look through all these things direct. So this parameter called results has,
It's not so different, 20%. Is that an exogenous? Is that their unilateral? What was their unilateral action if there's no response from the other country? Is it 20%?
the optimal tariff rate is 27 point.
Okay,
Optimal unilateral tariff rate.
it's 27.8.
Yeah,
Yeah.
By
The country is 20%.
by country H. Yeah. So the first column is free trade. It's also the joint welfare max in this case.
Yeah.
Uni H stands for unilateral tariff by country H with
Okay.
free trade by country F. As theory tells us in the Hector-Lean model, that this is a large economy. You can exploit your monopoly power by putting on an import tariff or an export tax. You get a 1.5% welfare gain. The other country has quite a small welfare loss. It's quite a
Well,
surprise.
no, wealth F. Wealth F. Is,
Oh, sorry. Yes.
It's nearly 3%.
Oh, J is joint welfare. Yeah, the Cobb-Douglas product of the two countries. Sorry. Yeah. So the welfare loss in percentage terms to the passive country is more. As you're not at the joint welfare max. It has to be the case.
It's
And-
largely it's largely as a net lump sum, a zero sum. It's almost a zero sum game. It's 995. So it's like the percentage change overall is 0.5%. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in the Nash case, where they're both responding, when you move from 1.2%, so it's more than twice as high.
Yeah. So then the third column is the Nash equilibrium by this iterative procedure, where country picks its optimal tariff, holding the other one constant, and then the other way around. And it converged, I don't know, pretty quickly, as I said. And the optimal tariff, since it's a symmetric model to start with, again, it's kind of nice to do toy models starting with what you know, where you know what the solution is, because it's sort of a check on your modeling, and your algebra and your theory. So they should end up in a symmetric solution because they're symmetric countries to start with. That would not be the case if they're different size. Each country has a tariff of 20.3%, and the welfare loss is surprisingly small. But that's the functional forms and stuff that's chosen. If the country.
My only pet peeve here, Jim, I wouldn't use 1 and 2 for the two goods and for the two factors, if you're not sure you can. Use X and Y and K and L. So
Okay,
I can help you. I can clean this up.
that's probably a good selection. This is a suggestion. Yeah, I have, at least the countries are not 1 and 2 as
Yeah,
well.
that's right. That's a good fit.
That would be
Having
a-
an index definitely does. If you look at the size of the model, I love it when the model can fit on one page. That's the thing. If I can see all the equations of my model when I'm in 12-point font on one page, and I feel like I understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's a really good step.
So the index version as it just becomes more and more valuable as the model gets higher, but if you had completely different technologies in different countries, it just would become less, this may be overstating the case slightly.
Yeah.
Where it's really, or different functional form for preferences in different countries. It wouldn't be so clean looking.
Or you pick up an R index and down all the other ones. You just get a regional index and you have humans preferences and technology. So
Yes, right.
the key thing is you have to know what you're doing. Once you bring sets in, you have to be careful because you can make mistakes and not see you made a mistake. The scalar model, as long as you study it hard enough, you can see the mistake just by looking at it. But with the index model, you have to be a little bit careful about where does the sum go, where does that close. Sometimes you get something. So the ways you can make mistakes. There are lots of ways to make mistakes.
I think I've made them all in
Yeah.
the course of 30 years of doing this or something. Meeting Tom changed my life. I have to say that.
Well, it's like,
I was able
try
to,
to get some insights from Jim. You get identifying what's important about what you learn from all of this. I guess we're open for questions. I've already gone through what our game plan is for tomorrow. Are there any questions from the floor? Requests from the last 2 days here? Or maybe it's my meeting. Muted.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Okay. What is our starting time tomorrow?
Like today, 8:40.
Okay, so we'll be here at 8:30 tomorrow morning. And I think we're just about done for this afternoon, so thanks everyone for coming. I'll see you tomorrow morning if you want to learn about using the WiNDC data and about doing simulations with the WiNDC model or extensions of the WiNDC model. Okay, so thanks a lot. We'll see you tomorrow. And Jim, thank you very much. Real great.
fun. Fun.